Hi, this is another of 5 videos that make up the Hinduism unit. You can watch these videos in any order you'd like, just make sure you watch all 5 of them. This particular video is about Hindus as a people of the books. Hinduism has far more books than Judaism, Christianity, or Islam put together. But those books aren't understood quite the same way as Jews, Muslims, and Christians understand their texts. In the West, people think of their text as a direct revelation from the God that lies beyond the universe. And they pore over those texts oftentimes, looking for the slightest nuance that will help them interpret the meaning, the intent that that particular God had for us. Well, Hinduism doesn't believe that the ultimate power, Brahman, communicates. It's permanent, it's not changing, it's not interactive, and therefore it can't communicate itself. It does have 2 categories. One kind of scripture that is that which is remembered, and another kind of scripture which is that which is heard. Neither one of those falls directly into the idea of a God handing over a text to people. Let's start our exploration by looking at some of the books, and the first one we'll talk about goes back 3,000 years and then some. The then some is the time when Brahmin priests would gather people together to do the sacrifices. And as they would sacrifice the animal, another group of priests would stand and sing songs, hymns, psalms, about the particular god that was being sacrificed to. Around the year 1000 BCE, somebody gathered a bunch of those together, 1,000 of them, into a single collection. And that collection is called the Rig Veda. This is just an anthology. It hardly has even close to 1,000. But the Rig Veda itself is only one of 4 Vedas. The other 3 are more hymns and some incantations. You might think of those as liturgy. Not the hymns, but the pieces that go in between in a worship service. Those 4 Vedas become the root, the basis, the foundation of everything that Hinduism says it is. In fact, if you reject the Vedas, you could be like the Buddhists, who were from India, grew out of an Indian milieu, used Hindu language, but by rejecting the Vedas as the basis of their religious tradition, count themselves out of the Hindu stream. They aren't a part of the Hindu umbrella. But at the same time, you should be aware of the fact that very few Hindus actually read the Rig Veda. What happened in history is that sometime around the year 600 BC, 2,600 years ago, some people began to explore these hymns, looking at them, trying to extrapolate a philosophical picture of the cosmos. And as they did, they wrote texts themselves, which we call the Upanishads. Upanishads comes from a word that basically means to sit at the feet of. Oftentimes the texts themselves are a dialogue between a master and a student, and so that's where they get that term. There are 24 principal Upanishads. There are more than that in existence, but 24 that are recognized as central to Hindu tradition. People do study these to this day. If you want to understand the philosophical system, theological system of Hinduism, this is a pretty good starting place to go. And in fact, the most famous of these, the Chandogya Upanishad, is a place where you'll find that description of the unity between my soul, my Atman, and the divine essence, Brahman. And the master says to the student, "Thou art that." The unity of the interior self with the ultimate reality of the cosmos. That comes from the Upanishads. Around the year 100 BCE or so, and I need to explain BCE here because I have to squeeze it in someplace. BCE is before the Common Era. CE then is Common Era. The years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, on down to 2014 are the Common Era. The years that go before that, 1 before the Common Era, 2 before the Common Era, 3, get the idea, right? Those are the same numbers as AD and BC, but the trouble is AD and BC are Christian terms. We're not talking Christianity here, and so it seems a little unfair to make those other traditions use Christian terms just to refer to a year. That's why scholars do the BCE and CE thing. Okay, around 2100 years ago, 100 BCE, there emerges this, I want to say it's something of a ideological, we'll just say a struggle. Different points of view in Hinduism. And one of those is going to be expressed in this text. This is the Mahabharata. It is one of two massive works. The Mahabharata might be, let's go past that, is the single largest text in human history. It runs to 1 million words, if I remember correctly, and we know this. It's a grand story. It's not meant to be history. It's a story. It unfolds. Bharat is the name of India. Maha means, great or wonderful. So Mahabharata is how India's story unfolds. And it's in here you'll find all kinds of stories about Lord Krishna. In fact, it's in there, one chapter of the Mahabharata, that is the Bhagavad Gita, the single most widely read book in Hinduism. It's read around the world, it's read by a whole variety of Hindu traditions, and it's the one that tells the story of Lord Krishna, an incarnation of Vishnu, who becomes a chariot driver to Arjuna, a prince. The story of the Mahabharata is the story of conflict between kingdoms. And there, in the battle, the great battle that's about to happen between Arjuna and the neighboring prince, which happens to be his cousin. Arjuna is standing in his war chariot with the chariot driver, Lord Krishna. He doesn't know who Krishna is, but Arjuna says, I can't do this. I don't want to go into battle and cause all this death. At that point, Krishna begins to describe to him that he must because it's his duty. And that's what this dialogue is in the Bhagavad Gita. Lord Krishna explaining to Arjuna why he has to act the way he's going to act, and he has to do it with detachment. That changes everything about the way people approach Hinduism. Another text from that time frame is the Laws of Manu, a text that tries to define people's duty and say, if you were born into this caste, this is how you would act, this is how you would dress, this is who you will marry, this is what you'll name your children, this is who you have to defer to. All of the rights and responsibilities of each individual caste is defined in here, on down to sexual responsibility and everything else. So the Laws of Manu are picking up on what the Bhagavad Gita is doing, saying there is a duty for each person. The Laws of Manu says, and we know what that duty is. There's another text that comes along shortly after, and we're not sure the date. It could be pretty early in this process, around the year 200. Could be a little later. No one knows the answer to this, but you know this text. It's the Kama Sutra. A lot of people are stunned to think of the Kama Sutra as a religious text. It is. Far from being a guide to sexuality, the Kama Sutra is taking a position that says there is an alternative way for an individual to experience the divine. And indeed, when you read the Kama Sutra, it flat violates laws that were set up in the Laws of Manu. In the name of treating men and women as equals, the Kama Sutra, a feminist text, says that women of every caste have a responsibility, not just a right, but a responsibility to have access to the religious texts, the Vedas and the Upanishads, that they must learn the sacred chants, that they must learn the mantras. This text is an attempt at a social revolution that's built into an understanding of the religion. If you want to study this text in depth, I do teach religion and sexuality, and it's a part of the book study that we do that during that course. There are other texts as well. There are the Ramayana, I'm sorry about the pronunciation, Ramayana, which is the companion volume to the Mahabharata. The Ramayana tells the story of Lord Rama, hence the name Ramayana, versus the story of Lord Krishna, both of whom are understood as incarnations of Vishnu, Lord Krishna being a few thousand years ago and Lord Rama being a whole lot longer before that. The Ramayana is not quite as long as the Mahabharata, and it's quite entertaining. And there are also texts like the Puranas. The Puranas is a collection of folk stories, if you want to think of it that way, the other stories about the gods, especially people like Shiva and Parvati, who don't show up so much in these ancient texts, although Shiva might be one of the oldest of the Hindu figures. And the stories between them look like just rollicking fun, and yet they carry some sort of meaning as people incorporate them. There are also a lot of other kinds of texts that have been written over the course of the centuries to fill in explorations of particular deities and that sort of thing. So when all is said and done, if you want to be a Hindu, you're going to end up reading a lot.